Hey guys, Dark Humility here. You can always catch me at twitch.tv/Dark Humility for 6 to 7 days a week of Diablo 2 action normally. In this ladder, we will be going hard on hardcore in just 2 short days. October 6th, Thursday, 5 p.m. PT. It will be going live. Of course, you could check out the rest of my build guides here on YouTube and at maxroll.gg in addition to these tier lists. Today we have a second tier list video. This one will be a lot shorter than the first though, because Blizzard decided to drop a bomb on us at the last second, making Sunder Charms change the way that Conviction and Lower Resist works relative to them. So now Conviction and Lower Resist will have the same effectiveness as if the monster was still immune. Just like normal. So the way it's always worked is that Conviction, the negative 85 fire, cold, and lightning res, would always apply fully to any monster that wasn't immune, which is still the case. Of course, there's also the fact that, of course, it would also be 1/5 if they were immune, 1/5 effective. So if it was Infinity Conviction, 85 cold, lightning, and fire res would be negative 17 effective. So it would be negative 17 negative enemy res, even with the Sunder Charm now, and not the full 85 if you break the immunity. If there's no immunity, it still works the exact same way, and of course reduces every monster by the full amount. But now, even with or without the Sunder Charm, Conviction will have and Lower Res will have the same effectiveness against immunes. This change will go into effect on October 6th, which is when the ladder starts. So, what does that mean? What does that bomb mean? It means something for the tier list. So it means that there has been some movement in the tier list here. And all of the tier lists, the late game tier list, the ladder start tier list is still the same. We mentioned that in the previous video that there have been no skill functionality changes. And ladder start doesn't include Sunder Charms and late game gear and terror zones and things like that, so it's unaffected. That's all late game stuff for the most part. And then of course we have the late game tier list, the Uber tier list, density tier list, elite hunted tier list, and Chaos Prep tier list, all affected by this change. The Terror Zone tier list is not affected. As a matter of fact, if anything, it's more relevant now for the best elements, because the Sunder Charms no longer are able to give you the opportunity to reduce enough resistance with low resistance and Conviction anymore to really make the elements, I guess you could say, inconsequential. Not really matter. So now the elements will always matter for the most part. The best elements in the Terror Zone tier list, once again, are determined based on the immunities in the area and the builds that also are able to play and do well in that area as well. Alright, well, enough about that nonsense. So let's talk about exactly what changed. So we're going to go over the changes mainly. If you want to hear the full original discussion, I will post the link to the original patch 2.5 tier list video in the comments section. And all of these tier lists are now updated fully on Maxroll. So you can of course get my original document here with all of the changes as they have been made, but what we're actually going to do is we're actually going to look on Maxroll because it's a lot cleaner looking anyway. Credit once again to Macro Bioboy, Teo 1904, and BT Neanderthal, as they are all on the Maxroll team with me, and we all have just the last second here rehashed out the tier list to make sure they're as accurate as possible right before the ladder goes live. So let's go into exactly what changed since the last video. So of course you can look at these tier lists yourself. We'll go over the late game tier list first. So the big thing that changed since the last video, with the Sunder Charms not having Conviction and Lower Resist not having full effectiveness even after Sunder is applied, so it's going to have the 1/5 immunity penalty effectiveness that they've always had. Is that the hybrid builds are back. So the hybrid builds are back up. Why? Because -17 isn't by itself enough to make the hybrid builds not relevant anymore. As a matter of fact, the hybrid builds are now relevant, especially for considering pure MF builds, Magic Find builds that don't have facets and other sources of negative res. You can argue this change makes any other source of negative res so much more effective. So things like Phoenix, Ravenlore, Flickering Flame, just facets in general, Death's Web, 3-piece strings, all that stuff becomes a lot more relevant when it comes to all of these charms now, because lower resist and conviction are way less effective. However, of course, Amp and Decrep are unchanged, so apparently they're going to be at full power, so that's actually a boon to physical builds too. And so one thing you'll see here is that certain physical builds have actually risen in the rankings somewhat. We have Frenzy up 1, and we also have Strafe back where it was in patch 2.4. One thing I should mention, of course, before I go any further is that overall, build positioning is a lot more similar to patch 2.4 with this change because there's not as big of a difference, and the elemental builds aren't completely running away with power, particularly the fire and the lightning builds, and maybe poison to a lesser extent. The cold builds still are, though, so you'll see the cold builds are still where they were where we put them last time, which are much higher in general. As a matter of fact, we even decided to put Frozen Orb on the A tier because Cold Mastery is going to be at full power with the Sunder Charms. So is Amplify Damage and Decrepify. It's only lower resist and Conviction that are not. So cold builds are going to see a boon, or in general are going to see a boon relative to other builds. Physical builds are going to be higher, and hybrid builds will be relevant again, because in a lot of areas it will be advantageous in Players 1 to have different elements of damage, because Conviction by itself can't make it irrelevant anymore. So we have that. Firewall actually went down a tier again overall. This is mainly due to its ability to kill Ubers went down slightly, and it's a bit more in line with its ability to do other tasks in the game like elite hunting as well. But Firewall is still way better than it was in 2.4 with the Sunder Charm changes for sure, allowing it to actually kill Ubers a lot more effectively. And then we have Summon Druid and Fury Druid in the C tier. So they came back into the C tier back where they were in 2.4 because they are now... see, these up and down arrows kind of show you where it was since 2.4. So a lot of these changes are now like due to the Sunder Charms in general. Like Fireball is still really strong just from the Sunder Charm alone because fire immunities was the big problem, and you can still lower their res a ton. Just means that it's not going to be completely ridiculous with Infinity at full power stacked on top of it, but it's still going to be S tier power. Same thing with Nova. Of course, we can talk about also Phoenix Strike coming into the C tier as well. Phoenix Strike kind of was just reevaluated, really. It's just... it's good with Death Sentry, and it's kind of good overall, and it has all 3 elements, which is nice for Terror Zones as well, so it's back into the C tier as well. And like I said, the Frozen Orb builds, you'll notice that Frost Nova, Frozen Orb, and Blizzard are all SA tier builds. That's just the way it is with Cold Mastery. The only thing that makes Blizzard different is that it destroys high player count way more effectively than the other cold builds, so that's why Blizzard is a cut above. Arguably, you could even say Blizzard in some ways is like S++ tier because it's strong at every point in the game now. It's strong when it comes to any task as well. It's crazy how powerful it is comparatively now that other builds don't have similar mechanisms to get the res closer to -100. Now it's more like a lot of builds are getting it close to 0 or maybe -50, so it's a little bit different. But overall, I mean, this is kind of where they stack up. Remember, the late game tier list is all about their comparative efficiency in executing their best case farming scenarios and versatility in terms of how many tasks like elite hunting, density destroying, uber destroying in the game that they can actually perform. So just remember, the introduction tells you what the tier list is all about. I think, it's never going to be perfect accuracy on any of these tier lists, and the late game tier list is no exception. However, I do think that Maxroll does the best job. You can always make a small argument for a build moving maybe up or down one tier. It's always possible to make arguments like that depending on how they're played, how they're efficient and whatnot. But I think we do the very best job giving you a very accurate and complete picture, and we modify it according to new information all the time. So that stuff's good. Of course, we'll continue to improve it and add new builds and future patches. One thing you can look forward to is potentially a Shockwave Druid actually being a damage build that is on the late game tier list as well, and a bunch of other pretty cool things as well in the future that aren't even on this list as it is currently. But yeah, Shockwave Druid definitely is an idea. As a matter of fact, we can actually put Shockwave Druid right here just so you guys can kind of see that. Something I didn't really think of doing. Okay. Oops. Okay. Oops. Okay. Alright, sweet. So, this is definitely really good stuff just in general, but overall, these builds are definitely looking very, very, very strong just overall. Okay, so, very cool. Alright, and so once again, like I said, the ladder start tier list is unchanged. Of course, we have it on Maxroll right here. It's literally patch 2.4. There are no changes that would change what you want to start in the ladder in terms of how effective it is at farming those starting items from some of those easy targets like Mephisto and Dariel and things of that nature. So yeah, that's still the same. Alright, let's go to the next tier list. So Ubers were affected quite a bit by this change because there were a lot of elemental builds that all of a sudden gained a lot of power as long as Infinity was able to apply to all the Ubers. But I guess they decided it was too much and it made a lot of Ubers a little too easy. This is a great change, by the way, the Sunder Charm change in general, I should say. For anyone that believed that it was making the game too easy, well, whole bunch of the strongest builds in the game just lost negative 68 enemy monster resistance with the Sunder Charms on the immunities specifically. So that's quite a bit. And remember, a lot of the Ubers are immune. So Uber Diablo and Bale are immune to fire. Mephisto is lightning. We have some of them immune to cold as well. Cold is Izual. Poison is Lilith. So yeah, there is definitely not a lot of fun stuff going on there. But see, with Blizzard can absolutely destroy still, and that is still the same because of Cold Mastery, so she's still up there. Nothing changing there at all. Lightning went down a tier though, because now it's not going to be quite as effective to do lower resist when the monster is when Mephisto is immune, so that's gonna make her go down a little bit. Same thing kind of with Infinity working on Uber Diablo and Uber Bale. That's gonna have a lot less effectiveness, which means Meteor and Firewall approaches went down from the S tier. So the S tier isn't quite as crowded anymore. Some of the elemental builds were coming down. What's also interesting is a lot of the physical builds went back up comparatively again because now they're a lot more consistent and they're a lot more effective and they don't require as much gear or, a combination of the two. Like Dream has the best of both worlds, crazy elemental damage, insanely high conviction aura, and insanely high physical damage with Decrepify. So yeah, it's really good stuff. So those builds kind of came back up kind of to where they were before patch 2.4. So as you can see, there's a lot less up and down arrows now from patch 2.4, but there still are quite a few. Those Sunder Charms still make a big difference for some of these builds in terms of like making them way more effective at killing these monsters. Of course, Lightning Strike and Lightning Fury are arguably the fastest Uber killers in the game once you have the full power there, so that's awesome stuff. And of course, we can take a look at this here. So we have a lot of the other builds. You know, these are just decent builds just in general. They might have come down after further testing or otherwise, but or just comparatively to other elemental builds, they're still not quite up there anymore. But or just less consistent than Frenzy in the case of Fury. So a little bit of stratification is still left over, despite that. So the charms, definitely big takeaway. Definitely made the physical builds better for Ubers again, and made some of the elemental builds weaker. One thing to also note here is that Holy Fire and Fissure all of a sudden became really strong, and now they're not all that strong anymore. It's possible to do them with them still, so they are still new builds, and you can see in the build guides themselves that, for instance, there will still be a Uber variant for it. However, it is no longer going to be one of the more dominant Uber builds doing something like Firestorm on Fissure. It's definitely possible now, though, with the new changes with this Flame Rift Sunder Charm. Alright, cool. So that's pretty much all I really have to talk about there for the most part. Oh yeah, see, Jab Fend also came back up to C as well. So yeah, just a lot of physical builds coming back up in general. Alright, let's talk about what changed from this little tiny change. Little change, yeah, it's a massive change. Just 3 days before ladder. It's actually crazy. What's also crazy is that this is the exact change I said they should have done at the very beginning of the PTR, and they waited till the very last second to pull it, man. It's crazy, man. It's crazy. But at any rate, the density destroying tier list, there were some things that definitely got modified. Definitely still increasing the fortunes overall of all of the cold builds here, making sure that the cold builds in general are stronger. But this is the ability of, not to farm a Hellfire Torch like the last one, but this is the ability to blow up a room or, as many enemies as possible in a given area as fast as possible in high player count. So this is a little different. Poison Nova and Lightning Fury are still the king and queen, respectively, of this capability. Nothing's going to change from... this is still the case in patch 2.4 as well. The Sunder Charms didn't even change it, even with max effectiveness. It's just how the builds work. They're just too effective with, Poison Nova and Corpse Explosion and Lightning Fury itself, just the way the ability works. However... definitely still seeing the same builds having their fortunes improved by the Sunder Charms, and still having strong density clear ability overall, as were in the previous installment, the previous video here for patch 2.5. However, we do have some other changes as well. You'll see that like Frozen Orb came back up a tiny bit. Frost Nova is actually higher now. So the cold builds just relatively are just gaining and gaining and gaining with this change, because once again, they even said specifically they don't want to change cold mastery. So if they decided to reverse their way of thinking, it would have to happen at the very last second. But the cold builds are just getting, even for density destroying, which isn't necessarily one of their strong suits, the cold builds, even the Sorcerer's cold builds, is they're still gaining for sure. All forms of Zeal are also up, so once again, physical builds or melee builds are coming up a bit relatively again. Holy Fire going down, actually. Holy Fire was really, really strong. It's still really strong, but there's like less areas where it can just absolutely melt everything, so it's not quite as strong anymore. It's coming down a little bit. Strafe, of course, coming up as well. So we have Strafe coming up a tier, and that's back where it was. Once again, you can see no up or down arrow now on it, so it's back where it belongs. Lightning Strike was kind of just like readjusted relative to other builds, but yeah, I mean, it's still very strong as a density destroyer, but nothing like Lightning Fury. Lightning Strike aim is on the news, and of course, there are a few builds that came up from F tier to D tier. So we got Frenzy. One thing to keep in mind is that all these physical builds, especially Strafe, they have Atmas, they have Amplify Damage or Decrepify, And they didn't say that's going to be at 1/5 effectiveness like before. They only said lower resistance and conviction. So if that's the case, then Amplify Damage and Decrepify are still going to be at full power after Bone Break is applied. Some people were complaining Bone Break wasn't effective enough, but now I don't think anyone can complain about that so long as that is actually the case, that Amplify Damage and Decrepify are going to be at full power still, and not 1/5 against immunities like they were, or they still are, without the Sunder Charm. So with the Sunder Charm, though, they should be at full power, which means physical builds are seeing their fortunes improve. Jab Fend and Frenzy is going up. Double Throw is going up. Warcry also went up as well. They all went up a tier. So we got Double Throw back up in C tier. That's Amplify Damage. All that stuff is definitely looking even better for Density Destroying particularly. Of course, they're already really high up in the overall tier list, a lot of these builds anyway. So it's kind of hard to put them higher. Okay, and then of course we have, yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. Oh yeah, Tornado Druid also came up as well, another physical build. So physical builds definitely seeing their fortunes improve relative to the elemental builds once again. So it's becoming a bit more equalized like it was in patch 2.4 between the physical and the elemental damage builds. Is it more so increased? No, because it's not like there's tons of physical immunes in the game anyways, and the elemental ones are still making the elemental builds even stronger, even with that change. It's just maybe not quite as crazy or pronounced, especially in high player count, like it was for a little bit there. Alright, and then of course, a couple more things to go over that changed. So in the Elite Hunting tier list, this is sniping monsters in players 1 with as much MF as possible, magic find as possible. Mobility is very, 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 very key. Okay. So Berserk Barbarian is always the king of this. Of course, just crazy high level find item and just crazy faster cast rate frames and one-shotting with Berserk. Just too good. Just like it's always been. And of course, what we'll focus here on are the changes, though, once again, from the October 3rd patch update. So we have the hybrid builds back up in the A tier, which is pretty awesome. So the hybrid builds are back up in there. Once again, those hybrid builds have always been like uniquely tailored towards magic finding in players 1. And now there's a reason to hybridize again because Conviction Aura isn't as absolute anymore. There is a reason to have that Nova, not just pure Fireball on Fireball Nova as an example. Same thing with Blizzard. So now they're just Conviction Aura with no facets and pure MF builds. Not quite as effective against the fire immunes anymore. It's going to be nice to have another source of damage. Okay. And of course, overall, we can see that, cold builds are just having a really good time overall, as they have been before, but even more so maybe overall. Hydra went back up a little bit again. That's from the trap fix kind of as well, but also kind of a readjustment from just comparatively to where everything else is moving up. Summon Druid also moved up, which is a physical build, and some physical builds here. Not too many physical builds in Elite Sniping in general. If there are any physical builds still in the F tier, it's because of problems with mobility, like Fury or Jab Fend, which are really slow teleport, or just really slow in general when it comes to sniping those elite monsters, which drop the really GG loot. So, yeah, overall, really good stuff. Or they're just slower overall, like Tornadoes. So some of these builds are still down there. The builds that were good at elite sniping, they're still physical builds that were already good at it anyway, so they can't go higher, but that's pretty much where that one is. So elite sniping doesn't change too much, honestly, if we're being honest. And then, of course, remember, Chaos Preparation. Chaos Preparation is going to be something that you might want to do. You might want to prep Diablo for a player that is trying to get to 99 or just want to run Chaos. But just prepping Diablo will be good. When there's a really crap terror zone, you definitely want to see if you can get people in your game doing this for you so you can kill Diablo. Because a really bad terror zone is going to be very inefficient in general. So those D and F tier terror zones on the terror zone tier list, which, like I said, is not updated. However, it's more relevant now that even with Sunder Charms, because the elements are relevant. So knowing your strong elements is very important. You can argue that for cold it's a little different because you have cold mastery, so the Sunder Charms do kind of render this irrelevant. However, that does mean you have to max cold mastery to make the most of the cold Sunder Charm. So that is a little bit of a detraction on those cold builds. So the strongest areas for a cold build are still the strongest areas for a cold build. However, obviously a cold build can still do whatever it wants once it gets the cold Sunder Charm. That is something to note there. There's really no way to really reflect that. Let's go back to Chaos Prep, though. And so Chaos Prep, as you can see here, Chaos Prep, some of those fire builds coming down, right? So Fireball Meteor, I'd still say, believe it or not, with just the Sunder Charm, just removing those fire immunes will make the Fireball Meteor with enough facets and Phoenix and Flickering Flame and everything else extremely effective still in Chaos. They're still going to be very, very strong. Just because you do so much damage on that build. So the Sunder Charm still makes this build a Chaos Prep build potentially, but it came down from S tier. Of course, all the fire builds you can see came down 1 tier. So fire builds down. Fire builds down in general. Firewall went down as well. Went down 2 tiers actually, because its damage over time is really slow, so without that infinity help, it's going to go down even farther. And we also removed the F tier and brought all of the other builds back up, which are a lot of the physical builds that were in F tiers, so they're looking a bit better comparatively again, such as Frenzy and Whirlwind and Jab Fend, things of that nature. And that's it. So they can spawn Diablo fast now. You got fire builds that can still spawn Diablo fast, but maybe not as extreme anymore. Like Fissure and Fire Blast used to be like B tier before this changed, but they'll still do a decent amount of damage, but it's not going to be quite as crazy anymore. All right, very cool stuff. Of course, Fissure also has physical damage, which is nice, but very, very good stuff. Anyway, guys, that is pretty much my report. That concludes my report here. I will post, of course, this updated document as well. I will also post the last video, if you missed it, from the initial patch 2.5 release. This change, though, is massive. It does make some pretty big differences. I am really glad they made it overall. I would say that it kind of made the game feel really... really trivial in the end game. You have just way too many builds absolutely crushing P8 without any other help from other party members. Maybe that was a bit of an issue as well. So people would just take like the entire terror zone themselves and no one else could really compete. So putting Conviction and lower res, back into acceptable values is kind of nice. It kind of broke a lot of builds. It just made a lot of builds crazy with the Sunder Charms, where there's literally no resistance to their damage anywhere in the game. Now the immunities in the areas matter, and now characters of various builds have meaningful weaknesses, even with a full build in certain areas versus other areas. So reintroducing some meaningful weaknesses and making those Sunder Charms not absolutely ridiculous and broken in every scenario, in every area, I think is the right move. I thought it was the right move from the beginning, but hey, they, if they figure it out, better late than never. That's the way I say it. I know some people might be disappointed, though, because now they really wanted certain builds to be super broken, like in every area in the end game. They're still going to be very solid once you get a full build. I think the Sunder Charms still allow you to take advantage of that with negative res gear, negative res Runewords, facets, and they really allow you to take advantage of it and make it to where you're not prevented from farming any area. But having areas that are maybe better or worse than other areas, I think, is a good thing. It makes it to where there's a bit more strategy, and there's also a reason to playing different builds over other builds. You'll see there's just a lot more builds back in the A tier on the late game tier list overall, which I think is a good thing. There's more upward mobility of physical builds again as well, because now Bone Break has full effectiveness for Amp and Decrep, whereas that's not the case for lower resistant Conviction. So I think overall this is a lot better of a balancing mechanism that they have introduced, and it's just a lot cleaner. But at any rate, that's all I really wanted to report today. Of course, remember, you guys can like and subscribe if you like these videos. I hope you guys enjoyed this tier list update. This is the Dark Humility D2R patch 2.5 update. Hope you enjoyed listening to my report in terms of how this change will affect overall power rankings of builds in the late game. And of course, we'll put everything, we'll have timestamps, and we'll put everything below the video here so you guys can check out all of the previous information. Remember to go to maxroll.gg, where of course you can access all of these insane guides and everything as well, like normal. And of course, I'm also planning to do some small updates to some of these guides over the next couple days to reflect this change. A lot doesn't actually change, even based on like the Sunder Charm variants and things like that, because it's still very relevant. It still increases your damage, but definitely not as crazy as it once was. So in some cases, it might actually only give you -5 lightning res if the monster only has 100 light res and the negative, so it'll give you like an extra lightning facet essentially. However, in some cases, it might be upwards of -20 lightning res, maybe more. It will allow you to kill elites that were always lightning immune that you couldn't kill with the lightning Sunder Charm Crack of the Heavens. With fire, gives you a lot more benefit because those fire immunities were a lot higher. And with cold, especially with cold sorceress, that cold Sunder Charm is insane, unless otherwise changed. And of course, you still have the poison one. I think kind of lost a little bit of power with that lower resistance change, but it's still pretty good, especially if you have your facets and you have your Death's Web and things like that in the right place. Still pretty solid. Physical definitely is looking really good. The Bone Break one now is solid, and the magic one is still useless. I guess they decided not to bother with it, just the way it is. But anyway, that's it for my Sunder Charms / tier list report. Hope you guys enjoyed it once again. You can always catch me at twitch.tv/darkhumility for all of the action live. We're going to, of course, be going really hard very soon here. And hopefully we can get some hardcore 99 characters going. Let's do this!
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
Anyway, it's always fun to watch a hardcore train wreck, right? That can be fun. Anyway, Dark Humility, over and out. See you guys next time.